there's tons of information out there for free that you can just soak it all up. But at some point, you really have to just put the foot on the gas and actually take a leap of faith and get into it and realize that you do know enough.
Welcome to The Path to Wealth, the show about well-being, fulfillment, and financial freedom. And I'm your host, Hannes Henschel. Welcome to The Path to Wealth. I'm your host, Hannes Henschel. In today's episode, we're joined by Zach Madsen, a residential real estate developer and home builder. Zach is the founder of Madsen Homes, a company specializing in infill development in Boise, Idaho. This year alone, Madsen Homes is planning on building 80 units and working on multiple subdivisions. Zach is continuously expanding his business by exploring new opportunities and forming strategic partnerships. Let's dive deep into Zach's journey, mindset, and strategies in real estate, construction, and home building. Thank you for being here, Zach. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me.
So what was your journey initially like stepping into real estate? Where did that start? Why real estate?
Yeah, so I originally started really by reading Rich Dad Poor Dad, where I think a lot of real estate investors or wannabe investors is starting, that's probably one of the very first books a lot of times they read is Rich Dad Poor Dad. So I got started there, interested in it. And then I kind of started reading more books, going to weekend seminars later on. And I did that for a few years while I was working a full-time job that I was really working 60 hours a week. And so for a few years, I was just kind of educating myself. And then I moved to Boise, Idaho in 2011. And at that point, I was basically ready to pull the trigger and buy my first house. That was, kind of after the market had tanked from the, 2009 financial crisis. And it was kind of an interesting period because there was so many really good deals. At the time I'd been learning. So I was wanting to house hack my first house. And so there was a ton of good deals on, duplexes, fourplexes, triplexes. And I actually, over the course of about 2 or 3 months, I put in 6 different offers and all 6 got bid out by cash buyers. And so that, at that point, I actually got a little frustrated, and then I got even busier with work. So I actually kind of pulled myself back a little bit at that point. And then a few months passed by, and then I kind of jumped back into it, and I bought my first duplex in 2013 and just house hacked. So I basically was able to live in one side for essentially free. The one side paid my mortgage, and then I lived there for basically the cost of utilities, which was great. So that helped me put some money into fixing up the one side that I was in. The other side was actually in better shape. And so I did that, lived there. And then about a year and 9 months later, I bought my second duplex and moved over to that house. It was actually a house with an attached apartment, and it was a little bit bigger, but I got a really good deal on that. And so kind of hacked my way through that. In the meantime, a few months after I bought it, I actually got fired from my job. And so I had been planning on quitting that job later in the year, but I got fired early in the year. So it just kind of lit fire under my butt to actually live out my dream of investing in real estate full time. So from there, I traveled for a few months because I'd been working for 10 years, lots of hours. So I traveled for a couple months and saw some family. And then I came back, hit the ground running, trying to find my first flip by doing my own advertising, driving for dollars, they call it. So I did that, found my first flip, closed on a couple months later, and kind of hit the ground running with flips. I did a lot of the work on that one myself and ended up making about $40,000 in profit over, I think it took me 3 months to fix it up, and then a month or 2 to sell it. And then I bought my second one and my third one shortly after that, and kind of was trying to scale in different ways. I won't spend a whole lot of time on my adventures in flipping, but I was trying a bunch of different things. Even though I'd learned a lot about flipping, I was trying to implement things, and it didn't seem like what I had learned was working, or at least I wasn't doing it how I was taught. Maybe, I don't know, but I was making money. I was just not able to scale as quickly as I had intended. And the piece I guess I was missing that I found out after, a couple of years of doing this was really like the power of other people's money. When I was using my own money and my own time, I wasn't able to scale as quickly. And so once I started, or I kind of figured out, I knew what I was doing flipping. I was making money on houses. I was confident then in using other people's money to kind of scale. And I used other people's money on my last flip, and then that's actually the point where I actually got into development. So I actually had to transition. So basically my last flip I bought in 2019, and it was a couple hours away. So that was another thing. So that was like, you know, I was having to go out further and further outside of town because Boise got so competitive with the flip market. You know, it was so hard to find deals, and the flips that people were buying, I didn't understand how they were making money, and that really they were just getting lucky because the market would go up, you know, 5 or 10% in the time that they had the flip going.
Yeah.
Because really, like, I was analyzing analyzing deals, and you know, if you're going to hire any kind of contractors, you were losing money on most houses. But anyway, so my last flip was a couple hours away, and used other people's money for that one. And then in the meantime, I actually found a good deal on a house that was sitting on almost an acre in town. That deal turned out to be where I could actually add 6 more houses to the land. And so that's kind of how I got into development. And right before that too, I'd actually analyzed a couple of single lots and double lots, but they just didn't work out. Like through my due diligence, they didn't work out. But eventually, you know, I found this one parcel on almost an acre, and kind of started through the due diligence and through the entitlement process when I was on my last flip. And then 2020 hit, and we had approvals to start the construction, but then that's also like right at the beginning of the pandemic. And so we kind of went through that process of doing all the horizontal development during the pandemic. And that was just an interesting period. You know, I didn't know any better, so it's like, but the main thing is the city, you know, everything changed online, which was different. Apparently, but that's, you know, I just kind of learned that way, I guess, because that was the first development I did. And so we ended up going through the horizontal development, putting in all the, you know, the street sidewalks, street lights, fire hydrant, the, you know, sewer lines, water lines, all that fun stuff. After that was finished, then we went to the vertical construction. And at that point, by the time I was ready for the vertical construction, I actually picked up another single lot that I partnered with somebody on. And that one, that single lot, we actually started building that house before we built the houses on my first development. And then I also picked up another development property in Garden City that was 5 lots. So that's kind of how I got started transitioned from flipping to development. There's a lot of details in there that I could share, but that was kind of my journey from first getting into real estate and then all the way up to now where I'm doing infill development.
Yeah, we can unpack that a little bit. You also mentioned, you know, that the rich dad, poor dad from like real estate investors to wannabe investors, and you made it sound so casually, your progression. But there is a lot of mindset in that and a lot of guts to actually go and do that. So at what stage is that you feel like, can I actually do that? And how did you maybe break through that?
Yeah, so I think for me, ultimately, I wish, like looking back, I wish I would have gotten into real estate sooner. I don't necessarily have any regrets, and I know that the timing always works out exactly how it's meant to work out. But if I were to, you know, coach my younger me, you know, from the time I read Rich Dad Poor Dad to the time I bought my first house was like 6 years.
Yeah.
So, and, you know, ultimately, if I would have, you know, jumped right in, you know, I you know, probably would have made some bad decisions on what the market was doing at the time. But you know, ultimately how I made the transition was just making a decision that I knew enough and that my theory was going to work. And I guess the nice thing with Rich Dad Poor Dad is, you know, he was all about cash flow. So it doesn't really matter what the property does in value. If you cash flow, you cash flow. And so that was my first property is, you know, house hacking a duplex that I lived in one side for free and the other side paid my mortgage. And, you know, that was way better than renting an apartment for $1,000 a month. Now I was paying, you know, $200 in utilities, but I was saving $800 a month. And my renter was paying my mortgage. So that, to me, that was kind of a no-brainer with the market the way it was at the time. It was really not that hard of a decision for me, just because I guess I figured I knew enough. And I think where people kind of get hung up sometimes is the analysis paralysis. You know, everybody wants to learn everything before they jump in, and there's so many niche areas of real estate that you can get into And a lot of people, have this wide net that they cast of like, oh, I want to do this, I want to do this, I want to do this. But really, you just need to pick something to get started, or even to take that next level, like that next step is pick something, learn as much as you possibly can about it, but then set a deadline for yourself, or set something, a physical goal up of when you are going to actually pull the trigger and do it, and then just do it. You're never going to, it's just like, when you go to college to learn a degree, but 90% of what you learn for that degree is actually on the job. So you might go get a degree and you think you know a lot about that trade or that field, but ultimately, like, your first day on the job, you realize how clueless you actually are, and you have to kind of learn as you go. And so that's the same thing with, any job or any career field is, and especially real estate. There's tons of information out there for free that you can just soak it all up. But at some point, you really have to just put the foot on the gas and actually take a leap of faith and get into it, and realize that you do know enough. And as long as your strategy is good, and you've, maybe you have, like, your backup strategies. You always, kind of what I learned along the way is you want to have multiple exit strategies. So if the first strategy for some reason doesn't work out, then you have these fallbacks. So I use those to this day too. But, ultimately, like, my strategy going into it is usually so solid that we don't really have to rely on the backup strategies.
Mm-hmm. And what in the journey gave you the confidence that after doing those flips, and when you saw the potential to actually build out those 6 other individual homes on that 1 acre, like what made you think I can also do that? Like, I've done these flips already, I've done my duplexes already, but I'm actually ready to take this on and go from like literally zero groundwork all the way up to building 6 homes.
Yeah, I think that's 2 parts. One is, I was pretty confident in my ability to analyze a deal. So that's one of my strong suits, where I've been pretty good about, figuring out, okay, what's it going to be worth at the end? What's the money I'm going to put into it? And am I going to be successful? And so I was confident in that, just because I'd gone through flips and I'd made money on flips. And then the other thing too is just the second part of that, and it's a little bit more nuanced, but the second part of it is, I knew I had to scale to reach my goals. And so even though I really knew hardly anything about development, but I knew I could learn along the way. And so it was really just, okay, if I'm going to reach my goals, I have to do this. And I'm confident in my ability to analyze a deal. So, I knew it was a good deal. And really, so it was just a matter of having the confidence to make a decision. That's what it comes down to, I guess, is just making the decision and taking a leap of faith. I mean, I've had so many instances in my career in real estate where, real estate is scary for a lot of people, especially if even when you're in it every day, it's like a little bit scary. Like, there's stuff that happens, from month to month, from year to year, where, there's a lot of unknowns all the time. But you can mitigate a lot of those unknowns by having a solid deal and a solid plan. But then just having the confidence and having a little bit of faith that, everything's going to work out how it's supposed to work out, even though you're going to have some curveballs along the way all the time. You just have to expect the curveball, and plan for it the best you can, but really then just be willing to, like, you kind of navigate through that.
So what are some of maybe the most challenging curveballs that you had to take on in this journey?
Specifically in development, initially and really kind of ongoing, is just the getting used to dealing with the government agencies. It's funny because in flips, if you've done flips before, that you don't know anything about the house until you do the demo. You know as much as you can possibly know, but once you do the demo, that's when you really know like what you actually have to do. But in development, it's a little different. Like, there's always unknowns down the road that you're going to come across that are usually instigated by the government. So, whether that's delays because of something, or some obscure rule that they have buried in their code, or something. So it's just a lot of, like, navigating the ins and outs of, like, all the the little nuances of development and the building code or the planning and zoning code, or and there's multiple different agencies that you deal with, so there's just a lot of navigating that stuff, and then dealing with things as they come up, comments through government agencies, and sometimes you can push through those. Basically the government's job in development is to tell you no in a lot of ways. Obviously, like, the government claims that they want development and everything, but they're ultimately, like, when you start the application process, they're pretty much telling you no every way that they can, or trying to fit you inside this little box of like what their rules are. And sometimes you can push through those, but ultimately, like, what you want to do is try to fit inside the box as much as possible, to make it as pain free as possible. But then also sometimes there's just things that you have to push through, or you have to like change your plans based on what their box is.
Yeah. That's always the thing once you get into like government, and then you have to like make it work. And it's a completely different skill set than like doing the actual development. It's like you're
Yeah.
dealing with people, and some of them might be like one-trick ponies, that just like, well, this is the rule. I'm like, okay, I'm like, well, but this doesn't make any sense. But well, this is what we got to do here, and then you got to find the workaround. And the interesting thing is, oftentimes when I got a no in government agencies, there is usually like a way around, or you have to knock at somebody else's door, another desk or something. Like it's not always no is not no always, even with the government agencies.
Yeah, that's 100% true. And if you realize that and know that and plan for, sometimes to get that yes, it just takes some extra time. So, if you're willing to use that, take that extra time, which ultimately equals money, as long as you plan for that, if especially going into it, if you know that you're going to be like a little bit outside of their normal box, and just plan for that extra time that it's going to take to get to that yes, then it's a little bit easier. But then also, what you run into too is, you have different people within these agencies that have different views on the same code. So sometimes you'll have a no from one person, the other person says yes, or vice versa. And that happens about 20 different times. And then eventually you all come in agreement and you have a project, but you just have to expect the time that's going to take. And usually, at least in the Boise area, that's usually about a year. So that's what I plan for my entitlement phase. And then then you have the development phase, which is another thing where you do the construction, and then you have to get approvals after that. But then that process takes another, it's basically each phase. You have the entitlement phase, the development phase, and the build phase, and each one of those basically it essentially takes about a year, give or take a few months.
What was that natural to you to have that kind of long-term vision where you're like, okay, I know this is going to take me like 3 years, maybe even 4 years. I can apply myself to that project with that level of patience.
Yeah. And so going into it, I had gotten advice that it usually takes 3 years. When I looked at everything on my first development, I looked at the application, I looked at the process, and I was like, oh, I can do this in 2 years. So I actually maybe set myself up a little bit for like improper expectations on my first one. I think it did kind of help me kind of push things through a little bit though too, but ultimately it's just, planning for the worst case and then doing everything you can to push up those timelines and get it done quicker. And I've learned that the squeaky wheel gets the grease, and you grease the government wheel by making phone calls. A lot of times emails go unresponded, or they don't give you a direct answer all the time on email. And a lot of times you just pick up the phone, and if you can get a hold of them, a lot of times, they're more helpful on the phone than they are in any other form. So I kind of found that out also.
Yeah, it's a bit sad, that like if you start making noise, you'll get more attention, which will solve things faster. At the same time, I think you're probably also someone like me who doesn't actually want that. Like I don't want to make noise in order to get more. I just want things to flow,
Yeah.
But I do see, like, for example, my wife, she doesn't take no's for answer, and she's like, she'll ask for just about anything she wants. And she usually in her own way gets it. And I find that very interesting, because it's actually only the people that go out there and ask for it who will consistently get a little bit more, or get it done faster, or
Yeah, absolutely. Ask and you shall receive, and that's definitely true in everything in real estate, so. And it's kind of funny too, because it's, for some people that's a very uncomfortable thing to do is ask for things. In fact, that's like kind of against my comfort, or it's like not in my comfort zone to ask for certain things. I'm good about it with the government agencies, but there's other things that I'm not necessarily good at asking for. So the more you can, I guess, get outside your comfort zone and ask for help, or ask for the thing that you really want, you're going to get things done quicker and more efficiently.
Yeah. I guess in this regard, it's like you have your goal, that going through the government agency is a step that you have to absolutely get through. So you're like, I just have to do this. So it makes you do it. Your why is big enough to walk through that.
Yeah. You can't do it without them. So, and I've found it's interesting, because I would say the biggest question mark with development is all the government stuff. And it's kind of sometimes like hair pulling frustration sometimes, because nothing with them is designed to be efficient or save you money. It's like they don't care that you have hundreds of thousands or millions tied up in a deal, and that their 3-month delay is costing you tens of thousands of dollars. They don't care. And once you realize that, as I should say, as an agency, they don't care. Individuals inside those government agencies are very helpful. And generally they have great attitudes, and they're very much willing to help. It's just that they're working inside of a system that isn't designed to be helpful. It's kind of interesting. And what I've found in Boise recently, so that the city of Boise redid our zoning code in December. It took effect. And they've actually removed a lot of the red tape that kept projects delayed and kept things from being done. And so it's actually interesting, because it's providing these new opportunities that didn't exist before, and also shortening timelines for stuff. And I've been saying, ever since I've really started going through development, I've been saying for years that, the government is, always pushing for, affordable housing, but it's their policies that are essentially keeping affordable housing from happening, because it's the time, the red tape, and the money that's involved in that. And by removing some of that red tape with the city of Boise, they're really like, I'm kind of excited, because they're opening up some good opportunities for things to happen quicker, and also for people that maybe don't have the experience or the confidence to get into development, to actually start getting into some small development projects. In fact, one of my friends in town here in Boise just recently announced that they were going to get into some development stuff. So that's exciting, because it's, I feel like the biggest bar for people getting into development is the education. There's not very much education resources out there. And then the other thing is the cost associated with it. Because there's a long hold period. It's not like a flip where you go in and you buy it, you fix it up in 3 months, then you sell it, and your hold period is 6 months or less typically. Development it's a long-term play. So it's, you go in with the expectation that you're going to be in it for 2.5 to 4 years. And, it's harder to get money for that. It's harder to find investors for that. On top of that, you can't really finance. There's not really lenders out there that lend on land. If they do, it's at a really low lever or high leverage, where they might provide 50 or 60% of the financing, but it's also not for a long term. So, it's pretty much out there to flip, like the lending is out there to flip land, but you also have to come in with a lot of cash, and then you have to plan on just flipping it once it's entitled, which is fine, but that's not my personal strategy. So then it's, we're dealing with cash basically, which it's just a higher bar for people to get into, because the access to capital is harder in land and development.
Yeah. And then, especially if somebody's new to the game, having the confidence of taking their life savings and betting it on themselves is a very tough shot.
Yeah. Yeah. Taking their life savings, or somebody else's life savings if they're using other people's money. And if you've never gone through that process before, then, that's kind of sometimes a hard sale. But, ultimately it can be done. You just have to have the right expectations. And then I guess the other thing with development is there's a lot of professionals along the way that can help you, but also, if you're willing to pay for it, people that'll go through the process for you, and there's still meat on the bone after you pay for that stuff. So there's a few ways to to break into it. I just decided I wanted to learn for myself how to do it and build out my business in kind of controlling every aspect of that myself. But I could have just as easily hired somebody to go through the entitlement process for that.
Mm-hmm. So if you were to start by yourself, who would you like to have on your team to make it more likely to succeed in a new development?
Yeah, so new development, for sure, your engineer, who should also have their own surveyors. That's probably the number one thing, is your civil engineer. Somebody that's got good experience in development and probably where in the areas, locations that you're wanting to build too. So for example, I do a lot in the city of Boise and Garden City, and it's infill, which means it's already within city limits, and there's usually already utilities in the main road. So we're just going a short distance to pull utilities off the main road and into this piece of land, versus it's very different if you're going out and building a 200 home subdivision on 40 acres that's outside of city limits, or it's in the path of development. That's, you want to make sure that you have the right professional there that has experience in what you're trying to do, because otherwise there's just, if the engineer doesn't know what the city's expectations are, you're just going to deal with a lot. It can be done, but you're just going to deal with a lot more back and forth is all.
Yeah, then it creates an enormous amount of inefficiency. If somebody has to learn it while he's doing it, it's sometimes it's just great to buy that experience to keep things moving and make sure that those things are covered. And if you have somebody who's a local expert, then they might even have existing relationship that can further kind of grease the wheel a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I guess that's the main one in going through the entitlements. And then you have other smaller parts that come up too. So you'll have you usually need some kind of landscape plan. So it's good to have a landscape architect, depending on the size of the deal that you're doing. And there's a few other things, but your main one in the entitlement phase is your civil engineer and the surveyor. And then in the development phase, the ground stuff, you have one main groundwork contractor typically that's going to put in the roads and prep for the roads and sidewalk and put in all the utilities. So you want to find a good person there, and part of that is getting multiple bids from these guys also, because you'll find a wide range. In fact, on my second development deal, so I bought it from another person that does development, that they passed on it because they couldn't put in the infrastructure for any less than $375,000.
Yep.
And this was on 3/4 of an acre lot for 5 lots. So on a per lot basis, that was pretty expensive. I would, because of my contacts and my ability to go around and get bids, I was able to bid it out and I was able to get it down to $250,000. So I saved $25,000 per lot from what they had planned, and because of that, it actually penciled for me. And so I was able to get that deal. And then we actually ended up coming in about $20,000 under budget too. So I actually, when I was all said and done, I finished at $230 to develop 5 lots, which isn't too bad. That's, a little less than $50,000 a lot, $45,000 a lot.
Yeah. That's one of the best things if you come in under budget. No, that's
Yeah.
that's a rare one in development. No.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it also takes a reasonable team to work with. You need to work with people that you can hold accountable to their numbers, and that are not promising the moon, while they can't barely get you off the ground.
Yeah. 100%. And that, I guess that's the other thing too, is when you get bids or estimates, if you get an estimate, a lot of times that's all it is an estimate. But and sometimes that's what you need to get a rough idea, but then you also want to solidify that with a contracted price based on the plans. So the approved plans, once you have those, you need to ensure that the estimate that you got is going to be the price that you're billed at the end. And sometimes that's hard because, sometimes you have stuff that comes up, but But for the most part, especially with the development infrastructure, that's a fairly set cost on that stuff. So if you just hold them to a bid and have a contract signed, then you're not going to have too many surprises there.
Do you think that incentivizes them to occasionally do like a less premium job where they're less likely to put in the extra work because they're trying to keep their margin nice?
I mean, I guess there's a risk of that. I will say with the horizontal development, there's the inspections at every step of the way. So, the utility companies and the city have to inspect literally everything, every part of that development. They have to sign off on it, or the engineer has to sign off on it. So there's really not many ways where they can cut corners and get away with it. So it's pretty much the same work either way. And ultimately these guys have big insurance policies, and if they cut corners or didn't do something right, it's going to come back to bite them anyway, because now they have to tear up a road and dig 10 feet deep to dig up a sewer line that they installed incorrectly, and now it's leaking. So nobody wants to do that, so they're not typically going to cut corners, and they won't get away with it anyway, just because there's so many inspections along the way. It's hard to mess something up.
So it sounds like the value here really is in having an eye on that contractual commitment to making sure that is properly in writing.
Yeah, absolutely. And then and there are other subcontractors that you deal with also. So you'll have your your main groundwork people, but then you also have subcontractors. Like you might have a different company that does your concrete, a different company that does your asphalt. Maybe you have a sign company, somebody that puts in the street lights, so you have an electrician do that. So there are other bids sometimes that you have to get as well. But once you have really those stamped set of plans, you can get all those bids, and you can have a really good idea of what your cost is going to be going into it.
So what's your kind of your standard of holding them, or what's your standard that you want to hire? Like if you get a bid from a vendor, what experience do you want to see with their past developments that you would actually consider their estimate?
Yeah, so I'll first start with 3 bids. I almost always will not use the highest priced bid, because a lot of times those guys are, and it's kind of funny, I joke about this a lot within my circle, but if you see their name plastered all over their brand new pickup trucks, you're paying for that advertising more than you're paying for the work done. So if they have their names plastered all over everything, I'm typically not hiring them. So that's one way to save money, is you go with the guys that don't have that overhead expense that you're paying for.
Yeah, that are in for the work, not the fancy brand.
Yeah, exactly. So and new development, you can get away with that, but where a lot of these guys have long-term relationships with builders and developers, and they don't need to advertise because they just stay busy. Like I keep my guys busy. Like I'm not their only builder or developer that they work for, but I use them multiple times a year, and they have other guys that use, and so they have no need to advertise. And then once you have that established relationship too, like I'm actually sending them business too. So when people ask for recommendations, getting back to how I decide to use them, most of the guys that I've used that I use now, I got recommended from somebody previously. So a good source of that is Facebook groups. So there's contractor groups. I'm also a realtor, mostly for my own purposes, but I'm part of a realtor group. So I've been able to find like really good contractors through those different groups. And then you give them a chance to bid something, and then if you like their bid, and you usually want to meet them first before you ever hire them to do anything. But typically, I'm a pretty good judge of character, and you just get a vibe from somebody that if they're a good person or not, and they're not they're going to treat you fairly, and get they care about the work that they do. So if you get that vibe and their bid looks good, then you hire them. And some it's a little bit of a shot in the dark, but you go with your gut. And 90% of the time that works out great, and you establish some great relationships with people. And then 10% of the time they don't do so good, and you just have to the work still gets done, but maybe you didn't like how they did business or how they did it or whatever, and you just move on and use somebody different the next time.
Yeah. And I think this is the valuable part of it. It's like at the end of that, you want to do business at the speed of trust and build those long-term relationships. And this is where it really compounds. And if you have somebody where you see like, okay, they're not doing business in the way we would like to do business, and you can swap them for somebody who is in it in the way you're in it, then that can establish for over 10, 15 years. And then you can in the future just compound and develop on a different scale with them.
Yeah, yep, absolutely. And the thing is too, like when you have those long-term relationships, those guys appreciate and respect that, and they're gonna treat you good forever, and they're gonna make you a priority. So, there's many times where, last minute I need something done, and I can rely on my contractors that I've had these relationships with for years to get it done. Versus if I'm just, trying to hire somebody new every time, you're not going to get that, that long-term relationship and trust built. So
Yeah. And then why would they make you their priority? Like they
right.
barely know you. You haven't stuck out your head for them in any way. You haven't covered them. You haven't given them work in years when others weren't able to give them work. Like, so,
Yeah.
yeah. So why did you originally move to Boise? What about, was that intentional because you saw that coming or that the market was going a certain direction, or why Boise?
No, it's kind of so I actually, I was working my full-time job. I actually managed a furniture store is how I ended up here. And I lived in Spokane at the time. I was assistant manager in Spokane, and I actually really disliked Spokane really badly. And I got offered the Boise location, and I turned it down initially because I hated Spokane so much that I wanted to get out of the Northwest. And my boss actually convinced me that Boise is completely different. And so I moved to Boise, and the first week I was here, I fell in love with Boise. So it turned out to be a good thing. But, I was focused on, moving up in the company at that point. But I also wanted to do real estate on the side. So even like when I first moved here, I was, wanting to house hack. I figured eventually, like, I guess at the time my mindset was adding rentals. So I wanted to get rentals and have that passive income, and eventually just have enough rentals that I could quit my job or whatever. So I wasn't thinking when I first moved here that I wanted to get into flipping or development or anything like that. It was more like cash flow was what I was concerned with. And so I did buy a couple properties. I kind of mentioned earlier that cash flowed really well, and especially once I moved out of the duplex that had good cash flow. And then so that was kind of my first focus. But how I ended up in Boise was really just based on my job and the opportunity it presented, and I guess me not completely turning down my boss.
Sometimes it's funny how life plays out. No, it's like everybody thinks there's like a grand scheme and like this and that, but there's so much coincidence. Like, and the older I get, the more random I realize life is. Like,
Yeah.
there's so many things that are out of my control. And yes, I can be intentional and I can put myself in certain situations, but oftentimes it's also like, yeah, I got lucky here, and then I happened to be prepared. I had the knowledge and I had the contacts, and I could make it work or something. But there is a lot of randomness around that too.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's random, and it's funny because like we all have our plans, and we all have our our vision for ourselves or how we want things to go. And more times than not, at least with me, it never goes the way I want it to go. But then how it turns out is better than I ever imagined. And part of that is just I'm a very spiritual person, and I have faith in Jesus, and it's just funny, but that's all we can do is make our best plans, but ultimately it's not in our hands, and it is very random, it seems. But then you look back on it, sometimes it takes years, but then you look back and say, wow, that happened exactly better than I ever could have imagined. And even though it wasn't my plan, it was somebody's plan, and it turned out amazing.
Yeah.
And that's also,
Yeah.
I guess, what gives me kind of confidence and faith too to move forward with some things. Like, for example, this year, I made a decision towards the end of last year when I was doing some goal setting for this year. Previously I've been doing, so I got into development. I've done 10 houses last year or something like that, and I really made the decision that I wanted to scale up this year. And so I kind of set out my goals, and I made the decision that I was going to add 80 units to the pipeline, which is basically 8 to 10 times more than what I've been doing. But it's it's kind of mind boggling. Like as soon as I made that decision, like the pieces that fell in place to allow that to happen. Um, and it's, it's stressful at times, but at the same time, I'm like, things always fall into place when I need them to fall into place. And it happens how, maybe not how I pictured, but it happens how it needs to happen. And so it's really neat.
Yeah. I mean, it's quite a step. No, you're stepping like, hey, I want 80 units to happen. And then you're preparing your mind to see what can make that happen. It's like by defining what you're going after, you're like, okay, these are the pieces that we need this to happen. And then you start seeing them. And then whenever something pops up and like, this makes sense. This makes sense. This is where it clicks and it starts working kind of towards you in your favor.
Yeah, absolutely. And I haven't read the book 10x is easier than 2x yet. But people have told me that that's kind of, I can see the basis of the book already, because sometimes it is, what I'm doing is easier than what I've been kind of struggling with, where I don't have all the, if you're trying to 2x your business, you're thinking in a different term than when you are 10xing, right? So like when you're trying to scale massively, your mind just works differently. Whereas 2x, you're like, okay, I'm going to slowly, methodically do this, versus 10x is like, you're methodically doing it, but you're also going at such a massive scale that you have to think differently. And now it's like, okay, how can I do this? Who can I get in this position to help me with this? It's just, you think differently. And I think the biggest thing is maybe the who you're thinking about, because you can't do it alone now. And I guess my tendency is always like, oh, I'm gonna do this. I'm just gonna muscle through it. But ultimately, like when it's bigger than yourself and bigger than you can handle, your mind automatically goes to, okay, who do I need to hire? Who do I need to partner with? Who do I need to present this opportunity to? Who can help me? And on the same token, who can I help? There's a lot of people out there that I can help, that in return, like we're going to have a mutually beneficial relationship. But I'm not even really thinking about that. It's more like, okay, I have an opportunity to help this person with my skill set, and I know it's going to, I know I'm going to be taken care of no matter what. But it's just kind of a cool thing when you're thinking at a different level, the opportunities that present themselves.
Part of what you just said is planting seeds. Like if you help other people, you're planting seeds for the future, and they might or might not come back and bear fruit for you. And then what I think is, if you think 2x, it might also, like you mentioned, muscling through. 2x is unfortunately still within a magnitude where we can just double our effort and make it work. It doesn't require us to think differently.
Yeah.
And 10x does. Like 10x means we need to really think about this differently, and how can we leverage other people's money or time or effort.
Yeah, it really forces you to get out of your comfort zone, and that's really where the most growth happens. And we get caught in our cycles ourselves, and everybody does it no matter what level you're at, where you kind of do the same thing over and over again. And then at some point you come to the realization that in order to really hit my goals, I need to do things differently. And sometimes that takes having a massive mind focus shift. So that's kind of what I'm in the midst of right now, and it's kind of exciting.
Where do you get help with that the mindset? Is there something that you're actively seeking out? Are you part of groups for that, or how do you work through that?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So I read a lot. So I have constant, like, different books. Read, and actually probably more so anymore, I listen to a lot of ebooks. So like when I'm out hiking, I'll have the earbuds in and listening to ebooks. So a lot of it starts there, but then I'm also in several different groups. I have so different masterminds. So for a couple years, I was in a Raise Masters, it's called, but it's a raising money for real estate mastermind. So just learning how to do that stuff
with Hunter Thompson.
Yeah. So that, and then and ultimately, I was kind of busy running my business, so I probably didn't make the most use out of that group itself, but I learned a lot, and it's something I'm going to implement as I'm like able to leverage other people's time with some of the stuff that I'm doing, which part of this mind focus shift is, you know, leveraging other people and letting other people do things that they're going to be better at than I am, or have more time for, or whatever, or that they specialize in, to free up my time. But another one is, you know, so I try to go to conferences several times a year. So I have a goal this year to go to one a quarter. And so I'm also in Brandon Turner's new group, Better Life Tribe. And so that is an accountability group. But then they also focus on like a lot of real estate education, and then listening to podcasts. So it's really just educating. I'd say it's two parts. It's education and it's accountability. Accountability is the huge one, because if you're just out there on your own, just saying you're going to do something to yourself, a lot of people can perform that way, but you're going to perform best by having outrageous goals that you share with other people, and then they're holding you accountable, but also you're kind of holding yourself accountable once you share that big goal, and you're sharing it. The more frequently you share it, the more you put it out there, the more you're going to hold yourself accountable to that also. So weekly accountability calls are huge. And then, you know, just being around people that are performing at a high level and doing what you want to do, or have done what you want to do, or at least out there, you know, grinding and hustling, versus, you know, getting caught up in the, you know, the misers and the people that are complaining about everything. So you just focusing on the things and the people that are going to help you succeed.
Yeah, truly. This is it. Like, you have to soak in that mentality. You have to be around people that are acting on a different level. You know, you can't be around 1.5xers if you want a 10x.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, Zach, this has been awesome. Where can people connect with you, find out more about you? What's your best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, the best way is to look me up on Instagram. So that's that Flippin Guy, Flippin without a G and then guy at the end. So ThatFlippinGuy. So they can follow everything that I'm doing currently. And then Zach D. Matson, if you just search me, that, you know, I have a YouTube channel that I don't have much on there yet, but that'll be more coming there. And then LinkedIn and Facebook and all that stuff I'm on. So
awesome. We will sure to add those to the show notes too, so that people can find it.
Awesome. Appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us at The Path to Wealth. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Check out our upcoming guests and be sure to share it with all your friends and family that want to take their life to the next level of wealth.